Okay, it feels like it's time to start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion today. I'm really happy to be here. So our panel conversation today is called Social Housing Retrofit, Technical and Financial Barriers and Solutions, which is part of our exhibition that we have here. Is called Retrofitting Social Housing, Alternatives to Demolition, and which is was designed and prepared by AAB Architects, ASH Architects for Social Housing Architects, and ECD Architects. As we all know, for decades, central and local governments have underinvested in social housing, which has led to the deterioration of the UK's housing stock. It's often the case that the decanting of residents, demolition and rebuild of homes is seen as the best solution for the creation of new housing and resolving social and economic failures in housing estates, mostly arising from years of lack of repairs and maintenance. However, these regeneration projects come with their own problems and unwanted consequences. We're here today to discuss the challenges and benefits of retrofitting social housing as an alternative to demolition. I'm hoping we can touch on the policies, environmental, technical, skills, financial barriers, and solutions. And for that, I'm joined by this incredible lineup of experts. So we have, in the different order I have here, Anne Power, Professor of Social Policy at the London School of Economics, Guy Woodroffe, Head of Policy from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, Jack Ostrofsky, Retrofit London Programme Director at London Councils, Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance at Portsmouth City Council, and Allan Dunsmore, Director at Conisbee Structural Engineers. As you can see, we have a very knowledgeable group of speakers aligned here in this panel, all coming from very different backgrounds and organizations. And because they come from different sectors, such as research, local authority, government, and design, each one of them will bring their own perspective into this complex subject, which will hopefully lead to a very rich discussion. The key questions that we'll try to address today, and please have them in mind when responding to the more specific questions we'll have, are: is it mostly the case that social housing can and should be in fact retrofitted, and that demolition and rebuild should be the exception and not the norm? What do you think are the main barriers to the more widespread adoption of retrofit in social housing? And what are the main technical and financial challenges and solutions? And finally, what are the policy changes needed to prioritize retrofit and reuse over demolition and rebuild? And I would like all of us here to think about this final question in particular, as we'll come back to it at the end of our panel session. In terms of the agenda for the session, for the discussion, I'll be asking each panelist to introduce themselves and say a few words on the topic. And then we'll do sort of the panel with questions from me. And later on, you will all have an opportunity to raise your questions directly. I'm sure we'll have a very productive session, and we have a lot to cover, so let's start. So yes, let's start by, if you can please introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where do you work, what do you do, and a few words on the topic that we have today.
Okay, well, I'll kick off. One, thanks very much for having me this afternoon. I'm really pleased to be able to be here. I'm Guy Woodroffe. I'm Head of Policy for what is now the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund, a scheme formerly known as the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which I've been kind of leading policy on for the last 4 years. So I've got a background in strategy and policy, although I confess that a lot of that time was spent in the rail industry, running R&D and innovation. So I've got more of a background in innovation and R&D than I have in buildings per se. But I've been doing kind of what I'm doing right now in kind of designing policy around the fund, as well as having responsibility for determining standards for minimum energy efficiency in the social rented sector. And during that time, we've effectively allocated around £1 billion of funding to local government and to housing associations to upgrade homes. And we're now kind of entering the next wave of funding as well. So timing today is great because it was great to see the Secretary of State announce on Monday two things. One, that there will be a consultation by the end of the year on minimum energy efficiency standards for the social rented sector, as well as the private rented sector. These are both really, really important, and we'll probably touch on this. But one of the key things is for the social rented sector and social housing landlords is about long-term certainty in terms of aims, goals, ambitions, as well as funding, as well as rent as well, to support the long-term sort of financial planning and strategies that social housing landlords need to have in place for their assets. So it was great to see that announced on Monday, that consultation by the end of the year. The other thing that was announced on Monday was the next wave of funding under what is now the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund. And so that will open on Monday to allocate funding again for retrofitting social housing. So really looking forward to working with the sector on that. And again, that marks an evolution of the funding that government is providing, because that will be a funding over 3+ years, which is the kind of longest delivery that we've had for that funding. And all the time, what we're working towards is that longer term certainty of funding direction and outcomes. So that's me.
Thank you. Jack?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jack Ostrofsky. I'm the Retrofit London Program Director for London Councils. Councils is the collective for London councils, and my program is funded by the housing directors, and the purpose is to accelerate the pace and scale of retrofit in London generally. We're really, really excited by the announcements, and we're looking forward to working with government across and laterally, up and down with the supply chain. There's, my background, I'm a building surveyor by profession, and I've had a variety of different roles in development, strategic asset management, and, obviously building surveying and fire risk assessment. And the things that Guy mentions about that long-term certainty really resonates with my strategic asset management hat on, so we could plan properly. And, some of the most difficult challenges, of which there are several and probably too many to count, is what to do to a house or a home to make it more energy efficient. So the MEES, Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards consultation, the outcomes for that will also add to the certainty that we need on what we need to do to make people's homes warmer and safer and, combat fuel poverty. But we've got some really great panelists, so I'm going to just move the microphone along.
Steve?
I'm Steve Groves. I'm Head of Building Maintenance at Portsmouth City Council. So my involvement really is the case study of Wilmcote House. I was the strategic lead for that project that started way back in 2012. We went through the whole process of doing a feasibility around whether we should retain the building or demolish it and rebuild. We opted to go down the refurb model, and once we started working with ECD architects, we also went to not just a simple refurb, but we went to Enefit standard, which is the passive house equivalent on refurb. The Wilmcote House project is the largest NFIT project in occupation, certainly in the UK, if not Europe, I think. And one of the things we did, we really wanted to learn a lot about it. So what we did alongside that, we did engage with London School of Economics, who did some excellent research, particularly from a resident engagement perspective throughout the project. And there's a paper that has got all the details about that. And we also linked in with the University of Southampton, who supported us in doing a lot of really useful data capture around the temperatures and the use and the effectiveness of the scheme, because we were really keen not just to do the refurb scheme, but we wanted to learn as much as we could. So it's really key that we did the research alongside that. But I'm sure some of the other details of that come out in the question and answer.
Thank you. Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne Power, and I work at the London School of Economics. We have a little team called LSE Housing, and two of the team are here. Sorry, I'm not going to there.
Okay,
Yeah.
closer.
Oh.
Sorry?
Get closer. Maybe it doesn't work.
Right. Shall I start again? Okay, I'm Anne Power, and I work at the London School of Economics. We have a little research group called LSE Housing and Communities, and there are several people from LSE Housing and Communities here. I'll start with where we are now. We've been asked to do evaluations of retrofit projects, basically because we're very used to working with communities, and we're very good at finding out what residents are experiencing and thinking about what's going on. So our first retrofit project evaluation was Edward Wood's estate in Hammersmith, which is half a mile from Grenfell Tower. And so that became quite significant over time. And then we went on to Wilmcote House, which was a complete eye-opening experience and amazing. And we're now actually evaluating the Lancaster West estate, which is where Grenfell Tower is, and which is being totally retrofitted. So we're doing a lot of that kind of work. But that, for me, stems from two places. First of all, I was a commissioner on the government's Sustainable Development Commission, and while in that position, I was asked to do what was called a futures paper on the future of social housing, and I had to look at how social housing could be saved as opposed to be demolished. And when I looked carefully at whether demolition made sense or not, the simple answer I came up with is no, demolition almost never, like really almost never, even the very worst estates, except where there was zero demand for housing. So where there was too much housing, which happened in parts of Glasgow, it happened in parts of Newcastle, it happened in parts of Liverpool, where there was just too much housing, even I couldn't think of a solution. But where there was a need for housing, it virtually never made sense to demolish it. And I wrote a paper then called Demolition or Refurbishment, What Makes Sense? And that's gone on and on and on. I based a lot of that work on a German program, which some of you may have heard of, called the Zukunftshaus, which is the future house. And the Germans, as early as 1973, had shown that if you treated a house like a teapot full of hot tea, what did you do in order to keep the tea hot? You put a tea cozy on the teapot. So the Zukunftshaus was basically the tea cozy approach to housing. And I thought that was a brilliant way of arguing for retrofit. I had a personal commitment to stopping demolition because I'd lived in a demolition area and I saw the absolutely excruciating agony that it caused for families and the disruption it caused to the local communities and to the blight that it caused within the local area. There was never, in my eyes, never a justification for the community damage that demolition did from what I personally saw with my own eyes. And I was then involved in the Charteris Road area of Islington, I don't know how many of you know it, where there was a plan to demolish a perfectly lovely street of housing because it was multi-occupied and because there was quite a lot of vice moving into the area. And we managed through a terrible, terrible, terrible fight with Islington Council to save Charteris Road and it was turned into a cooperative, and Charteris Road stands today. It's still run as a cooperative, and I think that says everything that I want to say about why you shouldn't demolish estates.
Thank you, Anne.
So how do you follow that? Allan Dunsmore from Conisbee. We're structural engineers based in Islington. Hello?
Yeah, that's working.
We're based up in Islington, and we come from a background of retrofit. It was founded by Alan Conisbee in 1982, and our first projects were refurbishment projects. And that thread has sort of remained through the practice. And at the moment, we're sort of advising a lot of local authorities across London on their sort of on their estate, on the sort of various blocks. Some are LPS blocks, some are in situ blocks, and we're looking at them from the sort of Building Safety Act perspective. But over the last 30, 40 years, we've looked at a number of estates and advised councils on, repair, retrofit, refurbishment. So it's not suddenly a new thing that we're dealing with here. It's been a long-term thing that's been around for many years. And it's just been interesting to get involved in the exhibition here. We got involved with AAB Architects, looking at a project just round the corner from us, which is, I think, it's going to be demolished, but we looked at a theoretical scheme, a study for retrofit and repair, and it proved that you could keep the existing blocks. You probably need to do some structural work to maintain them, but we proved that they could be added to, they could be adapted, you could infill on that estate. Obviously, there are wider issues, the economic wider issues, which I think some of the panel here are more qualified to discuss than I am. But from a purely structural and architectural perspective, that was a good example of an estate that could certainly have been kept and adapted from that point of view. So.
Thank you very much. Great introductions. And so, let's start with the questions. The first one for Guy. And things perhaps are starting to change, and I would hope so, certainly. But which do you think are the main reasons that social landlords often still prefer to do demolition and rebuild over doing retrofit? And what work is the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero doing specifically to overcome these barriers?
Okay, bit of a leading question there. I'm not sure they do prefer it. I mean, I think when I kind of work with the social housing sector and with individual organisations, what you kind of understand is the complexity of decisions that are faced in managing their assets and managing the homes and providing decent homes for their residents. And yeah, I mean, they've got what I would think of as the sort of three Ds to contest with. Do you do something up? Do you dispose of it, i.e. sell it on, or do you demolish it and replace it? And those are not simple decisions that are being made. There are complexities to them. So I don't think it's a question of prefer. I think it is more of a question of sort of long-term strategies, both for the organisations, for their residents, and for their assets. And I think in terms of kind of government and government's role in this, I mean, one, I would reflect on the recent change in government and the new Secretary of State at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, Ed Miliband, who most people will be familiar with, who is incredibly committed not just to climate change and to mitigating the impacts of climate change, but also to providing a decent, warm, affordable home for everybody as well, which is kind of where the work that I do kind of fits in. And as well as Ed as Secretary of State, we also have a new minister, Minister Fambula, who, interestingly, her kind of role she sees as being about broadly consumers, but that includes residents. And so I think there is a sort of shifting focus, which is about placing residents at the heart of this and thinking about their needs and what is going to be best for them within that kind of wider strategy. So there is a shift in government. There's also a shift in ambition. And I refer to the Secretary of State's speech on Monday. And what he made clear there, again, was the commitment of the government to delivering a warm, decent, safe and affordable home with the security, the long-term security as well for people in their homes. So government is absolutely committed to that agenda. It's also committed to a significant scale up in terms of activity. So, and that includes upgrading millions of homes over the coming years, and social housing, social homes are, the significant really proportion of that. So absolutely supportive and wanting to work with the sector to see those homes upgraded, as well as, of course, having an ambition alongside that for new build and a significant programme of new build of 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years or so as well. So those two ambitions work alongside each other. It's not an either or, it's a both. It's about upgrading those homes to the benefit of those tenants and providing more social housing as part of a wider building programme to ensure that everybody can have that decent, warm, affordable home.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jack, do you want to share your experience on this from the London Council's perspective?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. From London Council's perspective, and maybe a little bit more expanding the commentary to social housing, and from my experience in that regard as well, is that demolition is very difficult to go through. So I've been involved in regeneration schemes. There's a balloting process that the tenants need to be consulted and agree to it. I was involved with a particular scheme where, sorry for the architects, but the architects were very enthused about their new placemaking plans and their public realm things, and the scheme was beautiful that they were going to be replacing potentially this place with. And when they said to the resident placemaking, somebody got up and said, "This is the place where my children learned to walk. This is where," and then went through a whole different series of experiences that they lived their lives in this place. So this is already my place. So that was, I think, highlighting the recognition of the people who will be affected by this. But there's also, extreme financial acute stress on housing revenue accounts that London Councils is, quite. It's affecting every housing decision for every housing officer, and the retrofitting existing homes that when you stand back and you look at their performance when it comes to the void rate, the cost to bring it up to a decent home, safe standard with all of the competing demands on it in the context of a housing crisis, there will be appropriate cases for demolition. But what we can't afford is any net loss of social housing, and the current policies are very difficult to make the cross-subsidy model work. So it's a very difficult conundrum that we are facing. But I think the default position is retrofit, because regeneration is very difficult. One of many conversations that I've had, personally it concerns me, is that the G and F rated properties that are going to be so expensive to retrofit, a lot of housing providers are looking to liquidate them and move them onto the private market, where there will be, at sea for retrofit. It should stay in the social housing sector, where there'll be more responsible stewardship of those. But the financial stresses on housing associations and boroughs, well, where's the answer? It's in a variety of different places that we need to find ways to do all of the things that Guy was talking about better.
Indeed, and yeah, it's such a complex issue that the solution will have to come from different fronts. And Steve, please tell us about the early days of Woodroffe House. How did Portsmouth City Council assess its viability? early on and compare the proposed retrofit with a demolition and rebuild scenario in terms of cost, time to decant the residents, disruption, densities, and all of that. And it's really related to these previous questions. So.
Yeah, I think from a Portsmouth City Council point of view, I can speak from that point of view that we want to retain our stock. We certainly have always wanted to maintain what we've got, and really demolition is the exception. Really for us. I think the bit of context, so if we talk about Wilmcote House specifically, Portsmouth is the most densely populated city outside of London. It's essentially an island. There's not a lot of land on the site. And I think when we were, the key for us was listening to our residents, I think, really. So when the whole question came up initially around should we spend that amount of money, we spent around £13 million doing the refurb on the block of flats, 11-storey block of flats. It was probably more of a political one, asking the questions about, well, shouldn't we just be demolishing it? The case that I built for that really was around understanding the residents. So from a resident point of view, it's a very densely populated city. It's in the area of most deprivation within the city. People have lived in that area for generations. They didn't want to move. They had, they were 3-bedroom properties. They had kids that went to the local school that was across the road. There was a whole load of social reasons why none of the residents really wanted to move. So that was really important to convey that. That said, the demands for Wilmcote House started out as a heating issue. It was an LPS block. There was no gas in the building. It's electric storage heaters, extremely inefficient. And some of the research that we did, and this is why the research was really useful for us, was residents were complaining about the cost of the heating because it was night storage heaters. But when we got the University of Southampton to put data loggers in, we actually established that they weren't even heating their properties to the World Health Organization levels. So it was the classic fuel poverty that they had a simple choice really about, do we heat our property to the right levels, or what do we do with that money? So there was a whole load of social reasons why we needed to do the scheme. But although it started out as the demand was our heating's too expensive, what we then also did look at the whole building and other demands. So those other demands were the fact that the decoration was poor. The windows were at the end of their life. We were having a lot of maintenance to do with windows. In an LPS block, not surprising, if people weren't heating their properties to the right temperatures, we had, I think, about 80% of residents had reported damp and mould in the last 2 years. And we had the roof was at the end of its life. So there's a whole load of reasons why we started out looking at it from the first response was we need to get a more efficient heating system in there. That was our first approach. That developed into, it's not just about the heating, it is about the whole building approach. So we could have had a really efficient heating in there, but it still would have been leaking energy because it was a very inefficient building. So that's where we got to a scheme where we were doing it, and then to the NFIT standard, deep retrofit. Completely think that is the right way in terms of the work that we should be doing to make these buildings more efficient. But obviously, what goes with that is a huge investment into one building, and obviously the challenge we have as a local authority, that's 111 or 107 properties that we were talking about, but we have got a housing stock of 15,000. So that's 13 million on one block is a huge investment into one block. So ultimately it also comes down to building the case financially for doing a retrofit. And that's so to do that, obviously there is the 13 million on one hand if you do the refurbishment, but then you have to look at all of the other costs in terms of doing the alternative. And obviously that's around the demolition costs, obviously. It's about the rebuild cost. Portsmouth being a very densely populated city, there wasn't a lot of land around Wilmcote House, so you weren't going to gain any more density to it. But then what we also did was look at some of those other costs that get missed out when you're doing that financial appraisal. So, when if we had emptied the building, we would have had the home loss payments to the residents. We would have had lost rent. So I think we estimated that we would have had 3 to 4 years of lost rent. So that rent loss was quite significant. And all of those things factored in meant that the cost of doing a refurb, I think it worked out about 50% of what the new build equivalent would have been. So I think at the time, back in 2012, I think we ended up with a scheme that was about 120,000 to do the refurb, but if we'd have done at the time the demolition and rebuild, we would have been looking at around sort of £240,000 a unit. And I think that we've done various bits of work since then to look at different aspects, and that has sort of borne out. So although that was back in 2012, 2014 when we started, I think whenever we've revisited that, the costs are fairly similar. You can be spending around 50% of the rebuild cost by doing the refurb. So that proportion does seem fairly realistic, even if we fast forward to today and the cost of inflation. Just to quickly close as well, though, in terms of the question, I think that we talked about, where are councils? Some of our issue is that when we did this scheme in 2012, and I'm sure a lot of other local authorities were in a similar position where we bought ourselves out of the HRA subsidy. So that meant that we were fairly in a good position, and we were certainly sold that it was a good position to be in, because we were masters of our own destiny, and we were sort of a frustrating term, but we felt we were cash rich a little bit, and we've certainly had a lot of plans to do. Not just Wilmcote House was always going to be the first, but we were going to do the refurbs to other schemes. What's changed since then has been, the government capping our rents, not allowing us to increase the rents to the levels that we would want to increase, but also the environment has obviously changed, with Grenfell and the fire safety works and such like that we have to do. So we're in a completely different environment financially than what we were back in 2012. And just to finally on that is, we have had the exception where we have demolished. So we did have 2 tower blocks. They were found to be completely structurally unsound. They were LPS buildings. So we have demolished those. But again, I think it backs up some of the cases for doing the refurb, because, the length of time that we're taking to actually do the work and the rent loss, and the financial environment's different in terms of borrowing and the cost of borrowing, has backed up that initial feasibility, which said that refurb was the better option financially compared to doing the demolition.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yes, a lot to take in on that, and you already, I had other questions in mind, and you have already covered them, so that's great. And why is it often the case that doing somehow expensive and complex retrofit is sometimes or often cheaper than demolition and rebuild, in your experience?
Is it?
Is it? Yeah. Why is it that even if retrofit can be expensive, the alternative is always cheaper?
I mean, the simple answer is that if you think of your own house and where you live, and you think of finding an alternative house for yourself, and you lose the value of the house you're in because you're going to demolish it, there is a huge cost already. You've lost your house, so you've lost $500,000, say, and you've had to buy another house, so you've had to spend $500,000. And then you've got to find a way of financing, replacing your house. So you've got to find another $500,000 in order to replace your house. And then you can't possibly offer it to anybody on a low income because they wouldn't be able to afford it. So just taking that simple calculation around your own house, you can see how it simply wouldn't work. Whereas if you think of the house you live in, even if it's very run down, and you think of everything that you'd like to do in order to make it energy efficient, you'd find it very, very difficult to come anywhere near £500,000. I mean, in fact, impossible. If you could get it up to 100,000, which is what happened in Woodroffe House, you would already think that was a lot of money, but you wouldn't be able to push it much further than that. And you'd stay in the house and you'd see it done and you'd oversee it being done. So you'd be able to make sure it was done carefully. And you'd have a home all the time. You wouldn't have lost a home. So, I mean, the cost of you doing up your own house to the highest possible standard compared with you demolishing your own house and replacing it, they just don't compare. So if you take an area like, say, Charteris Road, which was 120 houses, and you imagine doing that to 120 houses, knocking them down, housing everybody that was in those houses, and then replacing those houses, you're talking about 10 years, and you're talking about multi-million pounds worth of investment. Whereas if you do them up, which is what happened in the end, thanks to our fight, you might be talking about 18 months or 2 years, and you've got a beautiful street that you've preserved. I mean, it was a beautiful street before, but people couldn't see it because the houses were so run down and because there were so many social problems in the area. What's interesting about retrofit is that you have an area that they say is full of crime and full of gangs and full of bad people, and that's a good reason for demolishing. And when you don't listen to that and you say, okay, would you like the area to be saved? And the residents say yes, and you save it, and the residents stay where they are, when the area's done up, the gangs aren't there anymore, the criminal networks aren't there anymore, and the residents are happy. What's happened? What's changed? Basically, what's changed is the way the area is managed, because in order to retrofit an area, you have to have people on site who talk to the residents all the time, who get the residents on site, who get them in a cooperative mood, who support them. And basically that of itself gets rid of all this kind of disorder that happens in an area that isn't run properly. So one of our biggest problems in rundown estates, it is the condition of the buildings, but running alongside the condition of the buildings is the fact that we don't bother to run those places properly. And so nobody feels in control. And so the residents all go behind their shutters and the streets are a mess. Whereas if you involve residents and you have people on site actually making the area work, you get a completely different situation. And I think that's very, very telling. That's extremely important. It's how you run places as much as what you do to them that actually makes them work.
Thank you, Anne. I would like to move on now to talk about the environmental cost of demolition and rebuild versus retrofitting. It's sometimes poorly understood, or, often operational carbon savings are the reasons given for regeneration projects to go ahead without a clear picture of whole life carbon. Allan, please tell us about the whole life carbon implications of retrofit versus demolition and rebuild, and how do they compare?
Thanks, Loreana. So, as we all know in this, probably everyone in this room knows that the construction, industry is responsible for 40% of all global emissions, which is a massive number. In broad terms, in the building, looking at sort of typical buildings, you've got probably a third of that. So you've got a third that's embodied carbon up front, the materials to build it, the structure, the finishes, the cladding. So about a third of that is embodied carbon. You've got about a third in operational carbon, and then a third in sort of maintenance and probably possibly eventual demolition. The operational part of that has been, as everyone knows, has been heavily regulated, and is becoming a much smaller percentage of the whole life carbon, and probably the embodied carbon is now creeping up to about 50%, and about 2/3 of that really is normally the actual building structure. So just looking at those figures, if you can actually look at a building and with fairly minimal, the examples that we've looked at is usually with generally with minimal intervention, you can save that structure and so prolong its life for another 30 to 60 years. You're saving a massive percentage of that whole, the bigger picture there, and embodied in carbon. So just as a starting point, if we can reuse the existing buildings, the savings can be massive. But I think there's quite a long way to go to sort of get to that thinking for, every project. But the first thing we will do when we look at a building or any estate is to ask the question, can we at least reuse the structure? Is that viable? And is that a good starting point? So, so hopefully it just gives us a broad picture of where we come from.
Thank you for that background. And Jack, do you think that mandating whole life carbon assessments of any potential demolition and rebuild project could be one of the main policy drivers to incentivize retrofit? And what's your view on this? And should it be mandatory? And do you think it would make a difference in the number of demolition and rebuild projects, or at least in your experience with London councils?
I think absolutely there's a huge amount of potential around for retrofit or for new build. This comes into the rubric of planning policy. There is the 2008 Planning and Energy Act, the Merton Rule. Some people may remember it. It still has some remnants of a policy force where a local authority, which is really London Council's position, it should be up to the local authority to have planning. I think it was about 2014 that there was a reform that removed a lot of the local authorities' powers to have to mandate exceeding building regulations. So mandating whole life carbon would be exceeding building regulations. With my developer's hat on, social housing developer, I was working in technical management for Peabody at the time. There were some aspects of that reform that I really appreciated because, secured by design, for example, was inconsistently enforced. So as a national or regional developer, anybody would have a justification to say, I want one rule. But there is, I think, there's so much more to be gained from local control and local control of planning. So I think that's where that should happen. Right now, what London's councils are up against, I think councils across the country in this particular area, is that there's a written ministerial statement from 2023 that said, you can't do this, local authorities, you don't have the power to do this, and that's introduced ambiguity, and then that does create risks for a local authority to be challenged by the developer. So, clarity on policy in this area it's necessary. Who's in charge and what's the rule would be more than welcomed, and it would help with this agenda.
Yeah, it's definitely needed. Thank you. Now let's talk about what are the technical and people-related barriers to doing more retrofit. After being involved and doing research in so many projects, which are the key implementation, handover, maintenance, and user interaction problems that residents have when living in a retrofitted property, and how can we avoid this?
Living in a retrofitted property. Can people hear?
Yeah, just get closer, I think.
Is it on?
Yeah, get closer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, living in a retrofitted project, it's a matter of the staff having explained to you how things work. Like in Wilmcote House, there was a problem with the windows that were put into the kitchen. Previously, there'd been an open walkway in front of the kitchens, and so there was a lot of air that it was easy to let into the kitchens. And when once the balconies had been enclosed with glass, the residents couldn't get what they thought of as enough air. So that was a big issue. It was actually pretty simple to solve. You just had to make sure they knew how to open the windows, and then it was all right. So there are those kind of hiccups in living in a retrofit project. What's much, much more difficult is during the process. So if we take Wilmcote House as 3 stages, how do residents feel before the work's done? They're very keen on saving their buildings. They think it's fantastic that a lot of money is going to spend on their home, and it looks as though their home will be bigger, it'll be warmer, it'll be more comfortable. So the residents are totally in favour. During the process, the residents have got lots of noise, lots of dust, lots of dirt. Parts of their home are closed off with sheeting, while, for example, the balconies are enclosed. So it's very, very inconvenient for them. And they can't see how it's going to work out. They just can't imagine how it's going to look when all this sheeting has come down again. So during the work, there's quite a lot of fed up residents. And the brilliant thing that Wilmcote House, that Portsmouth Council did, was they appointed a tenant liaison officer who was literally on the estate running from resident to resident. There was only a total of 45 families on the estate, but that was a lot of work for a tenant liaison officer in order to keep all the residents involved with all the appointments, all the failed appointments, all the mess, all the changes, all the everything that goes with retrofit. So having this tenant liaison is absolutely key. And when we went round and asked the residents how they felt about the retrofit afterwards, very happy. Apart from the fact they couldn't open the windows, very happy. So you go from happy to very unhappy to happy. And at Lancaster West, where we are now, they're at the preliminary stage, so they're at the sort of preparatory stage. And one interesting feedback we've had from the residents at Lancaster West, because the neighbourhood management team on the Lancaster West estate are so obsessed with listening to the residents say they just don't want to be asked anymore what materials should be used in order to build the window frames. They want the technical experts to come along and say, we think that the right kind of window frame would be this. What do you think? So residents are kind of at their limit in being over-consulted. Yeah. And that does sound a little bit ridiculous. It's not exactly a complaint, but it's something where they would like the council and the neighbourhood management team just to get on with the work. So I think there's a kind of balance between consulting residents, involving residents, and actually having your technical teams know what they're doing and do a good job. And if they do a good job, then the residents will be happy.
Yes. Guy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would. And it sort of builds on a number of points that Anne, you've just made. And what we've found through the waves of funding that we've provided is a kind of lot of learning about how to involve and engage tenants in this sort of transition, if you like. Because this is a sort of massive change program, really, in terms of retrofit, in terms of decarbonising buildings, and in particular heating systems. And it's a massive behavioural change as well, in terms of how people in their homes kind of use heating. And in particular in social housing, where the majority of homes are on the gas grid, so they have gas boilers. And so people are used to kind of a switch on, switch off sort of way of heating and having hot water on tap. And as you move towards decarbonising those heating systems, then it requires a change in how you utilise those. And that's a big change. And what we found is where it's really successful is where tenants are part of the before, during and after of this process. So very much part of the kind of what is happening, what works is going to be done. Noting Anne's point about the extent to which you go down that route, but having people kind of embedded with the community to be accessible, to be available for that engagement as well, and then during the works to make sure that people understand what's happening, when it's happening, how it's happening, and making sure that work is done to a high quality, to a high standard, and disruption is minimised. And importantly afterwards, and how to make the best use of what has been done. And we had examples from the very early stages of what was a demonstrator program, which was a deep whole house retrofit program, which did both fabric and the heating. And heat pumps were installed with smart controls, etc., etc. But the kind of aftercare wasn't there. And people just didn't know how to make the best use of what was provided. And we've seen that then kind of learned from and built on. And now that kind of after care, if you like, is a really, really important part of this transition. But I think we're still seeing quite a lot of sort of tenant refusals in terms of these retrofits, these upgrades to their homes. And I think, it comes back to a point Anne touched on, it's easier to kind of conceive of where you're getting a new kitchen and a new bathroom and the change that that's going to make to your life and the improvement to your home. But making changes to kind of the fabric of a building and potentially the heating system is not so apparent. So there is more work that collectively we all need to do in terms of that engagement, in terms of being able to describe the benefits to people of this disruption that they're going to undergo in their home and potentially kind of losing things. You might lose some space through the works that are done. So kind of those trade-offs are important in what happens.
Totally agree. And you want to say something very, very short? Just
very, very quickly. When the architects were designing the Edward Woods retrofit, which was the first one that we evaluated, that's the 3 tower blocks right by Hammersmith Station. They went round and consulted every single resident. And when we did our evaluation, our pre-evaluation, and we asked residents why they thought the retrofit was being done, the overwhelming view was so that it was to make the blocks look better so that the Westfield shopping centre would benefit. And the architects were absolutely horrified because they'd spent all this time consulting residents about, how much better their flats would be and how much warmer they'd be and how much more energy efficient they would be. And the residents just hadn't got the message. Well, most of the residents hadn't got the message. Yeah. And our take from that was to do what Wilmcote House did, where you have a tenant liaison officer who literally goes back and back and back, constantly talking to the residents in order to help them understand what the hell's going on, because they're not in control of the process. So they have to rely on somebody talking to them to keep them in the picture.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Allan, which do you think are the main technical and spatial issues affecting the viability of retrofit projects, and which are the main structural reasons why a property can be hard to retrofit or even sometimes impossible?
Thank you. I think one of the big challenges is for the LPS blocks, so the large panel system blocks. There's still several in London, and when we've looked at them, there usually is a solution to make them safe. So that the big question with these blocks is around robustness, and are all the panels tied in? There's a conception that. A misconception that a lot of these blocks are like a house of cards, so you could take out one panel and the rest come down. And the example of this is the Ronan Point in 1968. In Newham, a block of flats, there was a gas explosion, which then brought down a whole corner of a block and 4 people died. And since then, that led to a massive review of the structural building regulations in terms of robustness, disproportionate collapse, and it has constantly evolved since then. So engineers are sort of much more switched on to looking at, if we're looking at an existing building, especially a panel block, is it adequately tied together? So there's a lot of the upfront investment and proper investigation. Does it have concrete carbonation? Is the concrete sound? And then it's looking at what, after that investigation, it's really investing in, can it be, made safe effectively? Is there an issue? Can it be made safe? And what is the cost of that? So, and most of the majority of the situations that we've looked at, it can be adequately tied together. So we've found varying degrees of robustness and tying in these blocks. And then it's a question of usually adding a sort of simple sort of steelwork solution of angles, resin anchors, so that the whole the floors are tied to the walls effectively. And in the case of an accidental load, whether it would be a gas explosion, I mean, gas has been removed mostly from them, or even a vehicle impact at the base, what would happen? So it's taking a sort of risk-based approach and looking at, just a sensible way of making these buildings safe. In the scenario where you've got an in situ concrete block, then you don't have that issue. There's much less issues around the tie forces and everything. They're much more robust. But I'd say that, the main challenge would be when you do come across an LPS block and looking at retrofitting that, you do need to look at it thoroughly, investigate it, and then, there usually is a solution. I think the only time that we've found one that we had to demolish, it wasn't a structural issue, but there was a lot of asbestos in one of the blocks, which had to be removed to get to the panels, and that made that block unviable, and that block was demolished for that reason. So it wasn't a direct, technically you could have saved it, but like all these things, there are a multitude of other complex factors that you need to take into account.
The many unknowns.
Exactly, exactly. So that was a unfortunate unknown on that occasion that we did find, and then, did lead to the demolition.
When opening up for the starting the works.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Allan. Guy, when doing retrofit, do you think we're chasing the right targets? And what's your view on EPC reform? Are we not creating more retrofit work in the mid-future by not using the right metrics and targets right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's always plenty of, I think, debate and discussion about targets, metrics, what incentivizes the right behaviours in the right way. I mean, EPC reform is kind of on the horizon, and is another thing that the government will consult on shortly. But we've kind of got a system right now which, although flawed, I think has a sort of broad-based understanding to it. And I think we have to kind of recognise that there are different sort of levels of maturity, different levels of capability and capacity across social housing. So that's across local authorities and local government, but also across housing associations. Because when you think there are around 1,600 housing associations, there's a lot of smaller organisations that don't have the resident technical knowledge and expertise that resides with them, or the capacity for this. So in lots of ways, people talk about kind of air tightness measures and other metrics you might use, but that introduces a level of complexity that I think is probably going to be detrimental to kind of making progress and making improvements. The simpler we can make this for people, the more understandable we can make this, the better. So, there are flaws in any system, I'd say, and flaws with any set of metrics. So you never get the perfect set of kind of metrics in place. But EPC reform will happen. But I think what we're doing right now is about, I guess, the taking the right approach to retrofit, which is taking the most sort of cost-effective approach, and which is a no-regrets approach as well. So you make sure that kind of what is being done today is going to be fit for the future, whatever the kind of metric happens to be. If you're dealing with improvements to the fabric of a building, then you do that in the right way. That means that is about a sustainable, long-term, viable asset, and improves the quality of that home, as well as dealing with the energy performance of that home. So I think, lots of debate about this, but I think keeping it simple and making sure that we make progress all the time in that kind of least regrets way. And I think we'll see changes over time as well in terms of where we move from kind of a sort of fabric-focused approach to a focus that's looking at decarbonisation of heat. And again, there's a lot of debate about kind of this sort of fabric versus sort of clean heat, and
we'll get to that.
Oh, okay. I've jumped the gun there, but effectively, look, I mean, kind of metrics are never going to be perfect, but what they do need to be is simple. What they do need to do is incentivize progress, and the right progress in the kind of least regrets or no regrets fashion. That means that what is done today is viable, sustainable, and right for the future as well.
Thank you so much, Steve. Very, very quickly. from the council perspective and from the residents, do you feel that after the Grenfell tragedy, have you seen an attitude change from residents and from the council in terms of the use of insulation and fabric improvements, doing retrofit, and what discussions can be had with residents to overcome those fears, and how can we bring them on board? We've had that as designers, so I would like to know your opinion.
Well, the short answer is probably no. I think residents, I don't get the sense really that we've had a lot of residents talking to us about concerns about insulation or how the buildings are constructed. I think, you know, the change has been more for us as a local authority, and the focus on fire safety and the impact that's having on our programs of work and our budgets and where we're spending our money, essentially. From a resident perspective, I don't think we've seen that, certainly in Portsmouth. But I think some of that is around the fact that we have tried to engage as much as we can with our residents. So I don't think our residents feel that they're, you know, we've certainly had some blocks that had ACM and such like. So we've certainly learned off of Wilmcote around making sure that it's not just about sending out letters, it's about having staff dedicated to doing certain roles. That resident engagement is so key. And sort of building on what Anne said, you know, the real difference was having our own resident liaison person was somebody that the residents could trust. And apologies if there's contractors in the audience, but they don't tend to trust the resident liaison who's paid for by the contractor, because they're only saying a certain spin on the progress or dealing with the issues in a certain way. So I think that's the key aspect for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's now move on to the technical solutions, and you know, what are the main technical solutions, benefits, and innovations in the retrofit sector that can help to overcome some of these barriers discussed today. Now, Guy, you have your chance to talk about what is the role of heat pumps and other technologies in retrofit now and in the future compared to a fabric-first approach. Will retrofit could retrofit end up being resolved with a technology and not a fabric solution? And what is the stance from SHDF on this regard?
Okay, I mean, I think just to kind of broaden now first, I mean, innovation is needed in kind of lots of different ways. I mean, there's technical innovation, absolutely, but then it's also innovation required in how this is financed and funded, because this is a kind of long-term, if you like, national kind of infrastructure program, which is going to cost tens of billions of pounds. So we need to find ways of funding that and financing that go beyond the kind of current existing sort of ways of doing it. It's not going to be government funded. That it's not affordable. It's not going to be funded out of housing revenue accounts either. So we've got to find innovative ways for financing this, which is going to require kind of leveraging in investment into this, which, you know, kind of going back to the kind of the conversation about retrofit versus demolish. I mean, there's more investment into regeneration and new build than there is to retrofit, but that's changing, and we're starting to see kind of new models and kind of more interest from funds and from patient capital, which does see it as a long-term investment. So innovation in financing is required. Innovation in kind of delivery and on-the-ground delivery, which comes back to the sort of place-based approach of delivery and delivering across communities, is another area where there are sort of challenges to resolve. And there's a role for government in how we support that drive, and certainly kind of devolution and more support to combined authorities, mayoral authorities, other forms of kind of local government is an important direction as well. So how can we empower and how can we make it simple to bring together different agendas to deliver on that kind of place-based approach? And then, yeah, I mean, technical innovation in terms of what you do to homes, I mean, that will continue to evolve and continue to develop, and improvements will be made. I mean, what I see is I would frame it more as continuous improvement than necessarily innovation. I've not seen a whole lot of kind of really different solutions emerge, certainly in the last few years, but that doesn't mean to say it won't. And certainly within kind of the fund, then what we're doing with the next wave of funding is absolutely kind of focused on innovation and across all those forms. So we're definitely incentivizing that through the way that we're structuring the funding, through what we're looking for from applicants for the allocation of that funding. There's a big innovation thread that kind of runs through what we're doing, because we know to do this at scale and pace does require that innovation. And it's not just in terms of the kind of materials or the heat system, but it is about how you do this, how you deliver on the ground, how you engage with tenants, how you finance this. So it's the kind of whole suite of things that are needed to really scale this up and to deliver this at pace.
Thank you. Jack, building up on what Steve was saying earlier about having that fine balance between spending too much money on one block of flats and not spreading that budget into more homes, what do you think in terms of to balance those costs, the disruption and the time implications? What do you think is the right level of retrofit or energy reduction and that we need for the vast majority of our housing stock?
That's a really difficult question. I think the area to look at where we can innovate is around, we have a vague standard. The EPCs are annoying to me, but it is what we have, and it's the data platform that we have to work on. We need to incrementally improve that to identify the appropriate pathway to net zero for a variety of different property types. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And I completely agree with Guy that there isn't going to be some sort of silver bullet when it comes to technology. The innovation that we have to focus on is how to finance a least regretful pathway towards, some traditional or Victorian types of properties, heritage properties. They all have different labels, but we know that in a conservation area, of which there's very many in London, the likely solution might be interior wall insulation. So a innovative data-led approach would have the net zero pathway apparent to everybody who's going to be interacting with that property. So when the kitchen gets replaced, they put the internal wall insulation on that wall because they can't afford to do the deep house retrofit. We're in a war of attrition, and we're going to have to take incremental steps and be more efficient. Take area-based approaches is also another way, and that's been, amplified the opportunity to do so in the recent scheme, so we can do more of exceeding the EPC levels and do something for a block of flats that might normally have been curtailed by a cap and the sort of technical detail. So I think no one size fits all, but an innovative, more thoughtful, data-led approach is where the answers to your question lies.
And it's more important than ever to align the maintenance and repairs budgets with the retrofit budgets.
Can I just add something quickly on that? And something that, was alluded to again, that we have a variety of different capabilities and capacities across the social housing sector and amongst private landlords, is amplifying or increasing that knowledge so when people walk on site, they know what to do, whether it's the operative, the surveyor, and the resident who can say, wait a second, why are you doing it that way? And help and be part of the process.
And I know that in London councils, you are leading a very interesting program about archetyping, which will help with this. Do you want to tell us a bit on that?
You probably don't want to get me started.
But anyway, it's
another time. I'd love to talk to you about that, but I'll take the rest of the session.
Let's keep on that. But really interesting that we're trying, you're trying, because I was part of that as well, trying to simplify the approach to be able to do retrofit at scale. All right. So yes, we are running out of time. So I'll keep some questions for after with the drinks, and but I would like to yes, just I'm going to ask you the final question to all of you, and yeah, let's do half a minute each because I would like to have enough time to get questions from the audience. So let's start with Allan, and then we go this way. What is your key suggestion to the new government for a policy that incentivized retrofit over demolition and rebuild, and any other sort of, like, if you have to choose one policy, which one do you think?
Earlier, we talked about how energy and use is massively regulated. I think embodied carbon regulation would go some way, so it's totally unregulated at the moment. There are buildings going up that are, have massive amounts of embodied carbon to varying degrees. But if that, we've already been involved in lobbying for Part Z, it's called, which is bringing in sort of certain levels of embodied carbon, so that would become part of the building regulations. And I think that would go, if we could regulate embodied carbon, that would just make everyone think about, demolition, retrofit over demolition. And some schemes might go ahead as they might have been because they might be within, that certain band. But if we get it right, it should go some way towards sort of reducing that, that problem.
Thank you.
So Part Z, please, in the government, and if we could have it yesterday,
soon enough.
that would be better.
Right. Thank you. Anne, very quickly, just because, a few seconds.
One thing I would do is I would say that any social housing that's demolished has to be replaced on a one-for-one basis. You absolutely can't escape. And in a scheme where social housing isn't demolished, whatever you put back must have at least 20% social housing, so that you're constantly both protecting the amount of social housing there is and adding to it at the same time.
Perfect. Indeed. Thank you very much. Steve?
Mine, I don't know if it's a policy, but I think building on what Guy and Jack said, I think it is about the innovation is around how we fund local authorities. At the end of the day, I don't see in any discussions I have with other local authorities, social housing providers, not willing to want to refurb and meet the standards. I don't see that. What I do see is local authorities and social providers struggling on their knees in terms of funding, and I think there needs to be a whole different look at how we are going to do this, partly because I think that there's a missed opportunity that local authorities and social housing providers are the ones that can lead the way with this. Is it within the government's remit to help that, as opposed to penalising that? And I think that's where the real focus needs to be, is how we fund this type of work rather than just regulating it in a different way, because all we're feeling at the moment is more regulation but no more money, and that's a big issue for us.
Thank you.
How do I top those points? I think, from London Council's perspective, I would have to say the same thing. It's about the funding. There's a really very well-written, powerful report, The Future of Social Housing, that was led by Southwark. It's been signed by local authorities across the country. I would really encourage people to look into that, because it's touching on rents have been capped, but costs have skyrocketed, and we can't deliver. And that comes for new build as well. All of the large developing housing associations that I've spoken to, they're moving their money away from development. So we're having less and less new houses built, and we're losing more and more and more. It's kind of like an arterial bleed.
Thank you. And Guy, I don't think you can suggest policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be a career-shortening moment, couldn't it? Depending on what I say. I mean, I think if I was looking at it and actually providing advice, I mean, I'd pick up on Steve's point. This is about kind of long-term certainty, and providing that over, a decade plus, and that's what kind of we need to be doing in government, and providing necessary kind of funding as well as through other mechanisms that supports that, because it's that long-term planning that will enable then the coming together of asset management strategies and delivering those benefits to residents in their home. So yeah, long-term certainty, please. Been asking for that for a while. Indeed,
yes, to build up the supply chains and contractors, designers, and everyone together. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Now we're going to do a round of questions. Yes, please. Yes, that's what I'm about to do. So, no. So I'm going to give a couple of mics. Yes.
Sorry, I hope I don't go on too long because I've got masses to say. Okay, I mean, talking about the financial barriers and solutions, I mean, part of the barrier, I feel, is to do with semantics and how words have been redefined to mean something completely different. So, for example, of that awful word affordable homes. Okay, you have in London, the GLA definition of an affordable home is anything that is subsidised, which also includes shared ownership for households on incomes up to £90,000. Okay, that's an affordable. We also have a GLA definition of council homes, which means, again, anything in the affordable bracket that's built, including shared ownership, as long as it's built by the council or by a special purpose vehicle, company owned by the council. So definitions are changing. So if you look at a definition of affordability that's out there, that's from the UN Habitat, it defines affordability as being 30% of a household income, no more than that. And if you start, I'm looking now at Lambeth because that's where I live, and I'm actually a council tenant in Lambeth. You see that the council figures saying that the average household income in Lambeth is £38,000. You would need £57,000. I'm taking these figures from the council papers to afford a 2-bed in private housing. If you work out the affordability according to the UN, what they've said, it would mean that no home that is more than £950 a month is affordable. And so my question is, we absolutely need to maintain the council houses that were already there instead of doing the regen. We have a council that's proposing to get rid of 6 council estates of regen. Building back new will make things even more expensive. So you're going to change the demographic of the council, of the borough. Moving on. So there should be more importance placed on using the fact that they've got regen estates which are nearly empty. That's the best time to retrofit them. Take that as an opportunity to make the case for government to fund the retrofitting and stop charging VAT on retrofitting materials.
Good, thank you.
I've got more than that to say, but I know I can't.
Anyone would like to take that? I don't know the exact questions, but if you would like to say a few
more questions.
Yes, okay. And then, 2, and then would you respond together? Okay.
Hi there. I'm Rafe Bertram from Enfield Council and Retrofit Kentish Town. So my question is, I'm going to say something that... Mouth. Sorry?
Just get closer.
To your mouth. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I don't know if I'm wrong about this, or it's so blindingly obvious nobody's talking about it, or that it's a secret little detail that we're able to tackle. And that is, from my experience at the council, the funding for retrofit measures is wonderful, about £15,000-20,000, part co-funded, absolutely fantastic. The funding for new build from the Affordable Houses programme is £200,000 per property. So my hunch is that councils aren't kind of like, well, which one shall we do? We like, and all of everything that everybody said is so important. I'm so behind it all. But I think what we're facing is councils saying, okay, I've got a £15,000 retrofit project here, or I've got a £200,000 new build. And the affordable housing programme currently is 2021 to 2026, which makes my maths say it's going to be renewed. Is then the way that one could tackle this is just to adapt the affordable housing programme to somehow apply for retrofit as well? And therefore, I think one would see a complete swap over in all of these things. And so, am I wrong? Is it so blindingly obvious nobody's talked about it, or is it something we could develop?
Anyone would like to take a note to start with?
I can add. Well, I'll try. I think add to what you were about. I think you were about to say, but I think there's, from my perspective, there's two pots, and one would be Homes England that devolves to the GLA, and those products that you mentioned, the affordable homes, those inaccurate labels are from central government. So in defense of my colleagues at the GLA, that's the one that they have to work with. And blending those, I'm not sure how that would happen, but it is an interesting proposition. And what we do have, I think, on the near horizon, well, I've just caught up with a development colleague just before arriving here. Homes England has shut off the tap. There's no more money coming out of Homes England until the budget, and then there's going to be a reform. So the 2026, that will be radically different. And what Labour, the new government, has indicated is that they want to spark a lot more new homes. And what Guy was saying before is that we need new homes and we need to retrofit the existing because we have a crisis on multiple fronts. And finding the blend and finding the money for that, I don't know, but we need to. Now here's the hot potato.
Yeah, no, great answer, Jack. Thanks for that. I mean, I think there is a question in there in terms of how do we make it simpler in providing funding to local government to kind of deliver all of the outcomes that it's got. So this isn't wider than kind of retrofitting and homes and the rest. So I mean, there is a lot of thinking around that, and we've got two devolution integrated deals that are going forward through West Midlands and Greater Manchester, and that may provide a bit of a blueprint for how this works going forward. And certainly there's a kind of appetite for more. And as I understand it, the Deputy Prime Minister wrote out to mayors about that agenda as well. So I think it's how can we deliver the funding better to enable local government to deliver for citizens across the piece, and that would bring together multiple funding streams, so not just about housing but transport and other funds as well, so that you can genuinely, truly do kind of regeneration and improvement of place and everything that goes along with that.
I think just building on what everyone has said there, from a local authority point of view, when we did Wilmcote House, we clearly wanted to get any funding that we could for a £30 million project. It started out, I can't remember what the figures were, but we were hoping to get a certain amount of money. Unfortunately, with all the funding that was around, it's just never there long enough for you to actually go for it. So we ended up with nothing. And I think that goes back to what you said earlier, Guy. I think it's about longer term funding, because you cannot do a project of the Wilmcote House size and access the funding that you need to access. You know, this is a project that was £13 million. It started looking at the feasibility in 2012, and we didn't complete the works until 2018. And to be quite frank, we gave up trying to get funding because we couldn't meet the ridiculous deadlines that we had to do to demonstrate that we ticked all the boxes. And yet clearly, with a scheme that we were doing to the NFIT standard, we were doing all the right work.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, please.
There's one out here already. Hiya. My name is Jamie from Unit 38 Architects, and we work around the country with residents that are struggling with a lot of damp and mold in their homes to help them kind of campaign and advocate for retrofitting their homes. And it's great to have Steve from Portsmouth Council here because I use that project as an example so much. And when I show residents around the country that project, the emotional reaction is so enormous that you can tell people, like, you'll get rid of damp and mold, your energy bills will be basically zero. Like, it's really incredible. I had quite a specific question for you, which was just about how also you managed kind of mixed tenure within that block. I don't know if it was 100% social tenants, whether there were private tenants that got displaced because of it. I've heard a lot of stories from Scotland where retrofit has caused displacement of private tenants or kind of low-income leaseholders. But then it's also really good to, and then sorry, I've just got another question as well, which is slightly more for Guy, I think, potentially around policy. But it's good to hear that you had like a resident liaison who could take the time to inform residents, because that's what we see a lot, is like there's no single point of contact for residents within the council. Housing officers are really overstretched as well. And within PAS 2035, there's the clause around, I've forgotten the exact name for it now, retrofit advice. But we see time and time again, actually, where residents have managed to successfully kind of like lobby the council to then get HDF funding, that retrofit advice just is non-existent. And then you have contractors just letting themselves into people's houses, causing huge amounts of distress to vulnerable residents. And kind of what better ways there could be to either enforce tenant liaisons on these projects or just kind of better advice, basically, because we see time and time again that when you take the time to explain things to residents, they're all so excited about it and they're all so positive about it. But when a contractor just lets themselves into their garden, they're like, I don't want any of this happening.
Yeah, so I'll try and remember all the questions. I think the first one is we were sort of fortunate from the fact that Portsmouth, certainly where a lot of our blocks are in the most deprived areas. So I know whenever I talk to any of my London counterparts, they're quite jealous of the fact that in Wilmcote we had no leaseholders, so it was all social housing. So I think that certainly made it a lot easier for us to manage. To quickly reinforce thank you about the damp and mould. As I said before, the scheme, we had, I think, 80% had reported damp and mould in the 2 years prior to the scheme. I did a check, actually, before I came up here today. We've had one incident since, and the only reason we had that incident was because the MVHR was not functioning correctly. So, that really demonstrates, I think, and certainly, again, the big challenge we had was trying to convince people that actually you aren't going to need the heating. That was a big plus.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Shall I pick up on? Yeah, thanks for that. So, it does come back to, I think, points being made earlier by Anne and by Mimi, and that you've just kind of reinforced in terms of the importance of that engagement and that involvement of communities and of residents from the very start, so the before, during and after. Really, really important. I mean, we have it as part of kind of the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund in terms of people having to set out how they're going to do that. So it's part of that process. We've also done a lot of learning and sharing of good practice through the support service that we also fund, now known as RISE, and that has a lot of sharing about good practice, what's worked well, with case studies about where we've seen some really good things. So yeah, there are cases where it's not done so well. But what we're looking to do is to share that learning, share that good practice, and bring everybody up to that kind of high standard of engagement and where we've seen it work really, really well.
Thank you. I think Jack wants to say something very short, then Steve, and then the question.
Yeah, really
We'll
quickly.
probably
So the
close
new
with-
guidance offers incentives to have a strategic partnership around innovation, and so I think leading providers are going to be eligible for that. But basic, you need to have a customer relation strategy, and the models that we've seen is that you have a contractor on site with a resident liaison officer and somebody from the local authority with a phone number for each one of them, just on a very basic level. So, that I think is one of the priorities for all of the London boroughs that we're collaborating with on a strategic partnership. We polled them and they said the number one priority is a resident first led retrofit. So there's a recognition for that. And I think we're going to see a virtuous circle of continuous improvement because we know it works.
Steve, if very short.
Yeah, just a very quick one on the resident engagement. I think it isn't just about having your own resident liaison person. It's about really believing in that and really wanting to get that feedback. So I think the quick example of how that evolved, when we first did the resident engagement, it was very much like this, but obviously not as many people attending. But pretty much we got shouted at because people were unhappy about their heating costs. So a little bit from our own defence mechanism, I didn't want to keep going to meetings like that. So we changed the style of it where we had open days so we could talk to people one-on-one. We felt that otherwise we were being directed by the very shouty residents, and actually there were a lot of other residents that we could engage if it was on a one-to-one basis. And I think the other thing was that we very quickly adopted having a pilot flat, where we could test things out, bring residents in, have a one-to-one. And I think where they really started to trust us was that we had a number of these open days. We actually did listen to some of their feedback, of which some of it was very difficult. We had all the architects, the team there, and we got real feedback. And when they came back to future reiterations of it, they could actually see examples where the design had actually changed following their feedback, and that was more powerful than anything really in terms of engaging them.
Agency and trust.
Yes, question.
Hi, I'm Rufus Grantham from Living Places and also Desnes. I've got several questions, but I want to pick one. We've got a social housing retrofit problem, but social housing is only a sixth of the UK housing stock, roughly. So we've got a much bigger built environment retrofit problem. Both, I think, Guy and Jack mentioned the potential of sort of place-based, area-based approaches. How strategically valuable, given the stewardship, is the social housing estate as a catalyst for that broader multi-tenure and landing that in the sort of pragmatic near term? We've got mixed tenure in social housing, so if we're not going to displace people, we need a solution that works for that.
So on the mixed tenure within a social housing, where the freeholders of social housing, there's a series of legal barriers with the leases and the recharging mechanisms around that. We've just recently done a deep dive on that, London councils, and we've got some really interesting contributions from Oxford Law, and some of the leading practices will be publishing that shortly. Unfortunately, if you have what we would call an original right to buy lease, you cannot really retrofit because there's nothing in there that says you are allowed to exceed building regulations and recover the costs from leaseholders. But there will be an opportunity to reform. MHCLG is holding the pen on leasehold reform. So we would be asking everybody in the room to have sight of that and to lobby for change in that regard. But I think the wider question around area-based retrofitting and the stewardship that's offered from the large housing providers and the boroughs who also hold stock in the area is that it is incentivized in this current round but how to do that is challenging. We also have the recent, the LAD, is it? So there is an opportunity to blend financing. We will be working with the GLA to encourage private residents where we have a patch under the SHDF, or sorry, the warmer homes, where we have a patch of activity for that. We will be canvassing the local residents to say, this is what retrofit looks like. We will have hopefully some retrofit ambassadors who are happy with the retrofitting of their homes, and we will be encouraging the members of our partnership to open them. So I think that's a practical example of how we will try to start doing what you're talking about. But the scale we're talking about, although we're really excited with the amount of money and what we're going to be able to do with it, in the big scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket. But we have to start somewhere. You know, journey of 1,000 steps begins with one step.
Last question, but I can see a question here, and you.
Just to respond very, very quickly to that. I mean, the simple answer is yes. I mean, the power of the kind of social housing sector to provide a kind of lead and some of the muscle to do this is absolutely right. Particularly when you're looking at kind of supply chain and you're looking at procurement and you're looking at the ability to do that kind of large scale procurement and effectively deliver to an area with trusted partners and to provide that service to the wider community as well. And if you can then crack the sort of financing and investment challenge alongside that and start to offer almost a complete kind of service, then I see a real way into it. So we're starting to see that emerge. I think what we've got to do is kind of nurture that through what we do next, show how that can work, probably at a small scale initially, and then take those that do work and then scale them up.
Thank you. Final question here, very quickly.
Yeah, I'll
please.
try and keep it quick. In the 35 years since I started training to be an architect, this sector has managed to reduce its carbon footprint by 20%. And we've got 25 years left to get rid of most of the other 80%. Thankfully, yesterday morning, I read something called the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. I think I've got that right. That seems to give the roadmap in terms of embodied carbon and carbon in use of how we get there. Obviously, yeah, there's a whole other discussion about the model that sits behind that. But do the panel think there's a case for quickly government, local authority, and professional consultancies embracing that standard?
Okay, so you know, this Conisbee should really comment on this as well, but I fully advocate having regulations with Part Z. The methodology is robust, but the information to back it up when you're talking outside of maybe the concrete frame or the building services is spurious. So I would worry about the validity, but if there isn't regulations and an incentive to make that start and to force the supply chain to be accurate with what they're telling us, then it'll never happen. So to answer your question briefly, yes, I would agree.
Just quickly answer that. Just really quickly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, The London plan is actually quite good on embodied carbon, whole life cycle assessments, circular economy, but developers just gloss over it because it's got no teeth. So how do we get the teeth into the pre-app stage so that developers cannot develop until they meet the conditions that London and other places have set down? I mean, Marks and Spencer's building on Oxford Street has gone to the planning inspector. It's been, and developers are openly admitting that, yeah, that building could last another hundreds of thousands of years, but there's no obligation for us to consider repurposing, retrofitting, reusing that building. So it's being demolished. What do we do to get the developers to build for London what Londoners need, not what international speculators and asset hoarders want?
Thank you. So I would like Anne and Alan's opinion, both.
Yeah, just very quickly, Part Z of the building regulations would go some way to addressing that. So certain buildings wouldn't get building regulations because they exceed the amount of embodied carbon that would be in that regulation. So it'd be a very simple, quite a blunt tool, but you know.
It's too blunt because it's after the event.
But you couldn't get, but maybe it needs some planning. Maybe there needs to be some planning as well, similar, you know, with, you know, that maybe it needs to be linked perhaps. So you can't get planning unless you're below, you know, a certain amount of embodied carbon. So is this I guess, similar thing? It's regulation, isn't it? Because there's nothing regulating embodied carbon. It's political at the minute. It's left open. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the NPPF consultation closed last night. I got my submission in just in time. I'm hoping that and the NGOs that have written to the government to say that you really need to pin down what sustainable development is, because it's just played about with developers like a little mouse.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, and Anne and then.
Yeah, I was going to go back to a few of the contributions from the floor to say that there's no point in retrofitting to a cheapo standard. So one of the things that the government's funding is doing is allowing, I think I worked it out, it's about £1,500 per house through the new fund if you're actually going to retrofit. I think it claimed it was going to retrofit 6 million homes. Well, anyway, whatever the figure was, the total amount of money divided by the number of homes, it was 5 million homes and £6 billion funding, I think. If you work that out, it's about £1,500 per home. If we're going to hit net zero by 2050, we've only got 25 years to do it. You can't do up a home to a minimal standard now, and then in 5 years' time do it up again, and then in 5 years' time do it up again. That is a very, very expensive way of retrofitting. So basically, we have to bite the bullet and do exactly what you just suggested and impose the highest possible standard on everything we do so that we actually do hit net zero with what we do, so that we're constantly moving towards the right target rather than kind of stumbling across a few stones in order to try and climb over a boulder.
Thank you. All right. So thank you all very much. And before we have a break and we get some refreshments, I would like to take the opportunity to ask you to respond to a research survey on this very subject that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government is currently conducting. So if you search in your browser for the words Housing Demolition Retrofit Survey, you'll find some articles that will take you there. And it will be open until the end of October, so please respond to it, as they would like to understand if government should update national planning policy and guidance in the future. So this is highly relevant to our discussions today. They actually sent me an email and asked me to mention this survey today, so please do. We would also like to hear about your suggestions now with drinks, and then there's also a comment box at the end. You can leave your email there and any questions that you may have for us. And that's Geraldine from Architects for Social Housing, Alice from AAB, and myself, that the three of us sort of put together the exhibition and the panel discussions today. And yes, so finally, I would like to invite you to explore our exhibition that was prepared by us. I will be here until the 11th of October. And also, if you're welcome to join the second panel, that we're going to have probably fewer seats. So if you didn't have tickets, yeah, but anyway, yes, it will start at 6:30 sharp, and a final round of applause, please, for everyone here. Thank you so much.